Picture this. It's 2 in the morning. A man named Ryan Calloway is sitting alone at his kitchen table, staring at a bank statement he's already read 6 times. The numbers haven't changed. They won't change. But he keeps staring anyway. The way people do when reality is trying to tell him something their heart is refusing to hear. His coffee has gone cold. The house is quiet in that deep, heavy way that only happens when someone who used to fill it with noise is no longer there. And somewhere between the third and fourth time reading that statement, Ryan finally understands, fully, completely, with no room left for doubt, that the woman he loved and the man he called his best friend had been lying to him for almost 2 years. This is that story. And I'm going to tell it to you from the beginning, because where it ends only makes sense if you understand where it started. Ryan Calloway grew up in a mid-sized town where everybody knew everybody's business, which meant he learned early to keep his circle tight and his trust hard-earned. His father worked construction. His mother kept the books for a local hardware store. They weren't wealthy, but they were solid. The kind of family where dinner was always on the table and a promise meant something. By the time Ryan was 32, he had built himself a quiet but respectable life. He worked as a project manager for a regional logistics company, the kind of job that doesn't sound exciting at a dinner party, but pays well and rewards people who are organized, dependable, and good under pressure. Ryan was all three. He had a small house he was paying off, a truck he bought used and maintained with pride, and a savings account that he added every single month without fail. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the guy lighting up the room at a party. But he was real, and the people who knew him trusted him completely, and he genuinely believed that the same was true in return. He met Marcus Webb at 24. They were both in the same recreational soccer league, both equally bad at it, and they bonded over that shared mediocrity with the ease that only young men with nothing to prove can manage. Marcus was the kind of person Ryan had never been. Magnetic, funny, effortlessly charming, the type who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new best friends and a business card. Ryan admired that about him, genuinely admired it, without envy, the way you admire a skill you know you'll never have. Over 8 years, they became the kind of friends people describe as brothers. Holidays together. Marcus was in Ryan's corner through a difficult breakup at 27, sitting with him in a bar until 2 in the morning, saying nothing useful, but meaning everything by being there. Ryan helped Marcus move 3 times, lent him money twice without keeping track, showed up when Marcus's mother had her surgery, and Marcus was trying to hold himself together in a hospital waiting room. That was the foundation. That was what Ryan believed he was standing on. And then came Natalie. Ryan met Natalie Bressler at a work event, a regional conference that he'd almost skipped because he had a report due and didn't feel like making small talk over rubber chicken and cheap wine. He almost didn't go. He has thought about that a lot since. The particular cruelty of how close he came to missing the night, that changed everything. Natalie was there representing a vendor company, sharp and composed in a way that wasn't cold. More like someone who had simply decided a long time ago that she knew what she was worth and didn't need anyone else to confirm it. She had dark hair and a way of listening when you talked that made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. Ryan, who was not practiced at this kind of thing, said something awkward about the wine, and she laughed at it in a way that felt genuine. And that was that. They dated for 7 months before she met Marcus. Ryan introduced them at a birthday dinner, his birthday, actually, and he remembers the moment with the specific, painful clarity that only hindsight provides. The way Marcus turned on the full wattage of his charm. The way Natalie smiled at something he said. The way Ryan felt proud, in that moment, that his best friend and his girlfriend were getting along so well. He was 30 years old and still that naive. In his defense, and I want you to understand this, because it matters, there was nothing obvious, nothing that would have registered as a warning sign to any reasonable person. Natalie was warm and attentive. Marcus was the same friend he'd always been, showing up for beers, asking about work, remembering the small things. Whatever was beginning between them, they kept it completely invisible, which tells you something important about the kind of people they were willing to be. Ryan proposed to Natalie on a Saturday morning in October, in the kitchen of that small house, with a ring he'd spent 3 months choosing and 4 months saving for. She said yes. She cried. He cried a little too, though he would never have admitted that to Marcus. He called Marcus first, before his parents, before his sister, before anyone. Marcus said all the right things, said he was happy, said Ryan deserved it, said they needed to celebrate. That was 14 months before Ryan found the bank statement. Now I need to tell you about the business, because this is where the financial piece comes in, and you need to understand how it was set up to understand how thoroughly Ryan was taken apart. About 6 months after the engagement, Marcus came to Ryan with an idea. A friend of his, a contact from a previous job, was looking for investors in a small logistics startup. Nothing massive, just a regional delivery operation targeting the growing demand for last-mile fulfillment in suburban areas. Marcus had done some research. He said, the numbers looked solid. The market was real. He was thinking about putting in $20,000 of his own money and wondered if Ryan wanted in. Ryan was cautious. He asked questions. He read the documents Marcus provided. A business plan, some financial projections, a summary of the founding team's experience. He talked to Natalie about it over dinner one night. She thought it sounded interesting. She knew Marcus, trusted his judgment, said it could be a smart move. He put in $25,000, more than Marcus, even a meaningful chunk of a savings account he had built over years of careful, consistent work. Marcus handled the administrative side, the investment agreements, the ownership documentation, the quarterly updates. He was the one with a connection, so it made sense that he'd be the liaison. Ryan received regular emails, modest but encouraging reports. The company was growing slowly, finding its footing, exactly what you'd expect in the early stages. And Ryan trusted it, because he trusted Marcus. Here's where I want you to pay very close attention, because what I'm about to tell you is not something Ryan discovered all at once. It came in pieces, the way terrible truths usually do. One small thing that didn't quite fit, then another, until the picture they assembled together was something he could no longer look away from. The first piece was a phone call. Ryan was at work on a Tuesday afternoon when he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. The man on the other end introduced himself as Derek Howell, said he was a co-investor in the logistics startup, had gotten Ryan's number from the company's records, and was calling because he hadn't received a quarterly report in 5 months and couldn't reach anyone at the company's listed phone number. Ryan told him there must be some mistake. He had received a report just 2 months ago. Derek Howell said he had not. Ryan got off the call and immediately pulled up the last report he'd received. Read it again, and for the first time, with fresh eyes and a prickling unease in his chest, he noticed something he had glossed over before. The report was detailed and professional-looking, but contained no verifiable figures, no account numbers, no official business registration references, nothing that could be independently checked. He called the startup's main number. It rang once and disconnected. He tried again. Same result. He searched the company name in the state's business registry. There was a registration. That part was real, but it had been listed as inactive for 14 months, before he had ever written the check. He sat in his car in the work parking lot for a long time after that, not panicking yet, just thinking, telling himself there was an explanation, telling himself Marcus would have an explanation. He called Marcus that evening. Marcus answered on the second ring, relaxed and easy, said he hadn't heard about any issues, said he'd look into it, said Derek Howell was probably just confused about the reporting schedule. He was so calm, so completely, effortlessly calm. And Ryan, who wanted so badly to believe him, let himself be reassured. But he didn't stop digging. The second piece came from Natalie's phone, and I want to be clear, Ryan was not the kind of man who went through his partner's phone. He had never done it before. He would have told you, before all of this, that it wasn't something he was capable of. But something had shifted in him after that parking lot conversation. Something quiet and cold had settled behind his eyes. And 3 days later, when Natalie left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower and a message preview lit up the screen, he looked. He didn't mean to read it. And then he did. The name at the top of the message thread was Marcus. The message was short, 6 words. But 6 words can be enough to end a life as you know it. It said, "Does he suspect anything yet?" Ryan put the phone down exactly where it had been. He walked to the back door of his house, stepped out into the yard, and stood in the cold for a very long time. The kind of cold that you stop feeling after a while because your body has more urgent things to deal with. He did not confront Natalie that night. He did not call Marcus. He went to bed, lay in the dark next to the woman he was going to marry, and thought with a clarity that surprised him, almost frightened him, about what to do next. What Ryan did next is, in my opinion, one of the most disciplined things I've ever heard of a person doing in the middle of the worst moment of their life. He did nothing. For 3 weeks, he did absolutely nothing differently. He came home on time. He had dinner with Natalie. He texted Marcus. He went to the Sunday afternoon soccer games they still played in, badly and cheerfully, and he laughed at Marcus's jokes and let Marcus buy him a beer afterward. He performed the life he'd had before with such precision that neither of them noticed a single crack. And during those 3 weeks, quietly, methodically, he gathered everything. He went back through every investment document Marcus had provided and photographed each page. He contacted a friend from college who worked in corporate law. Not to hire him officially, just to have an informal conversation over coffee about what certain document irregularities might mean. His friend's expression as he reviewed the photos told Ryan most of what he needed to know before a single word was spoken professionally. He found Derek Howell again and arranged to meet him in person. Derek was a retired teacher in his early 60s who had invested $15,000 in the same startup, also through Marcus, also with the same reassuring projections, and the same complete lack of verifiable information. Derek had found 2 other investors through his own searching, a woman named Carol who had put in $18,000, and a younger man named James who had invested $10,000. Combined, Marcus had collected $68,000 across 4 people who had no idea the others existed. The startup was not failing. It had never existed. The business registration was real but shell, a document with no operation behind it, just enough paperwork to give the scheme a surface of legitimacy. Ryan sat across from Derek Howell in a diner booth and watched this older man try to hold himself together, and felt something harden in him permanently. He drove home that night thinking about Natalie, about whether she had known from the beginning, about whether the relationship had ever been real or whether it had been, from her side, from the very first night at that conference, a role she was playing to keep Ryan close and cooperative and unquestioning while Marcus worked a financial end. He didn't know. He still isn't sure. And that uncertainty, he has said since, was its own particular kind of grief. 3 weeks and 2 days after finding that message on Natalie's phone, Ryan made 2 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer, a real one this time. A woman named Sandra Okafor who specialized in fraud cases and had a reputation, according to the college friend who referred her, for being exact and relentless and entirely unmoved by charm. Ryan liked her immediately. He laid out everything on her desk, the documents, the photographs, Derek Howell's contact information, the names of Carol and James, the text message he had carefully documented. Sandra Okafor looked at everything, took her time, and then she looked at Ryan and said the words he had been holding himself together to hear. This is wire fraud and conspiracy, and you have more documentation than most clients walk in here with after a full investigation. The second call was to his bank, to begin the process of documenting the fraudulent transfer. He did not call Marcus. He did not confront Natalie. Not yet. He wanted everything in place first, because he understood, in that new, harder part of himself that had formed over the past 3 weeks, that people who had already decided they were willing to do this to him would not hesitate to cover their tracks if they knew he was coming. What happened next moved both faster and slower than Ryan expected. Sandra filed a civil fraud complaint that named both Marcus Webb and Natalie Bressler as defendants. She also referred the matter to federal investigators, because wire fraud, money moved electronically across state lines with intent to deceive, is a federal issue, and the amount involved crossed a threshold that makes federal agencies interested. Marcus's response, when he was served, was to call Ryan. Ryan did not answer. Marcus called 11 more times over the next 2 days. He texted. He showed up at Ryan's house. Ryan watched the truck pull up to the window, watched Marcus sit in it for 20 minutes, watched him finally drive away. He left a voicemail that was the most extraordinary performance of innocence and wounded friendship Ryan had ever heard, and which his lawyer immediately flagged as potentially useful evidence of consciousness of guilt. Natalie sent one text. Just one. It said, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to go this far. Ryan read that message and thought about all the mornings he had made her coffee, all the plans they had made, the ring he had spent months choosing. And he thought about 6 words lit up on a screen. Does he suspect anything yet? He did not respond. The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest with you about that, because stories like this sometimes get told as if justice is a light switch. You flip it and everything immediately snaps into place. That is not how it works. There were months of filings and motions, and a mediation session that went nowhere, and a period where Marcus got himself a lawyer who specialized in delay. But there were also consequences that arrived ahead of the formal resolution, and those mattered too. Derek Howell, once he understood the full shape of what had happened, was not a man who stayed quiet. He was 63 years old and had been saving that $15,000 since before Marcus Webb was old enough to drive, and he had a brother-in-law who ran a local news website and a complete absence of reasons to protect anyone's reputation. The story he told that website was accurate, specific, and included enough detail that 2 additional victims came forward. A couple in their 50s who had lost $20,000 to a slightly earlier version of the same scheme. Marcus Webb, it turned out, had done this before, not with the exact same setup, but with the same fundamental architecture, a plausible opportunity, cultivated trust, clean paperwork on the surface, and a total absence of anything real underneath. The earlier victims hadn't reported it because they were embarrassed, because they blamed themselves, because they hadn't believed anyone would take them seriously. Ryan gave their names to Sandra Okafor, who added them to the picture she was building. The federal investigation took 8 months. At the end of it, Marcus Webb was indicted on 4 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy. He took a plea agreement that included restitution, full repayment to all identified victims, and a sentence that, while not the maximum possible, was substantial enough to represent a serious reckoning. Natalie was not criminally charged. The evidence of her direct involvement in the fraud itself was circumstantial enough that prosecutors focused their case on Marcus. But she was named in the civil suit, and the settlement, which she agreed to without going to trial, cost her significantly. Ryan didn't track the details of her life after that. He made a deliberate choice not to. I want to tell you about the night it was finally over. Ryan was alone in that same kitchen, at that same table, when Sandra Okafor called to tell him the plea had been accepted and the restitution order was in place. He thanked her. He hung up. He sat there for a while, and I think people expect that moment to feel like winning, like the end of a movie where the music swells and the light comes to the window at the right angle, and everything resolves into relief. But Ryan has described it differently. He described it as feeling like putting something very heavy down after carrying it for so long that the absence of the weight felt almost strange. Like your arms don't quite know what to do when they're empty. He thought about the friendship. 8 years of it. Real years, real moments, real history that didn't stop being true just because of how it ended. He thought about Natalie and whether there had been any version of her that was genuine, and decided it was a question he would probably never fully answer, and had to be okay with not answering. He got up. He washed the coffee cup that had been sitting in the sink. He opened the back door and stood in the yard, the same yard where he had stood in the cold after reading that message, but on a different kind of night now, warmer, quieter. He had his house. He had his job. He had Derek Howell, who had become, in that strange way that shared adversity sometimes produces, a genuine friend. He had his integrity, which no one had managed to take from him even when they took other things. He had his name clean and untouched because he had refused to let it be otherwise. I've been sitting with Ryan's story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn over something you want to understand all the way through. And the thing that stays with me is not the fraud, and not even betrayal. It's the 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks where Ryan knew and said nothing and kept showing up and quietly and systematically built a case that would eventually dismantle 2 people who had decided he was an easy mark. That kind of discipline. That ability to feel the full weight of what was happening and still think clearly, still act precisely, still refuse to let emotion override strategy, is not something everyone has. It is, in fact, extraordinarily rare. He didn't blow up. He didn't confront. He didn't post it on social media or call mutual friends or do any of the things that would have felt satisfying in the moment and catastrophic in the long run. He just gathered. He just planned. He just waited. And when he was ready, when everything was in place and there was no way out for the people who had underestimated him, he moved. The thing about people who see others as tools is that they almost never account for what happens when those tools refuse to stay broken. Ryan Calloway refused, and that made all the difference. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you found yourself leaning in, holding your breath, feeling that quiet rage on behalf of someone who deserves so much better, then you already know why you're here. Every week on this channel, I bring you stories exactly like this one. Stories of ordinary people who were used, lied to, and left for broken, and stories of what they did next. No superheroes. No perfect endings wrapped up in a bow. Just real human beings who refuse to be the end of their own story. If that's the kind of storytelling that speaks to you, hit subscribe right now. Don't wait, because next week's story, it starts even darker than this one. And the comeback is something else entirely. And if someone in your life is going through their own version of this, their own silent debt, their own unanswered betrayal, share this with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is show them that someone else found their way through. I'll see you next week.